Hello all and welcome to Shatter Our Souls with Novaria. And today we are tackling the final boss gauntlet of Breath of the Wild in its entirety. And before we get into this, a little bit of a disclaimer. This is a big one. There are 6 phases to this boss battle, and due to the fact that I've been using minimal weapons for the entirety of the game, it's gonna be bigger than a lot of other individuals out there trying to do this. In fact, it's gonna be a lengthy one. Starting off, we have Windblight Ganon. Windblight is more about long-range attacks. Generally speaking, through this, using basic bombs is going to be enough. It's not necessarily the fastest option out there, but it will hopefully get him down at a half-decent rate. Windblight Ganon's core abilities include, but aren't limited to, using the cannon, which will require us to strafe out of its immediate sphere of influence. The second is the tornado. These options, or these combat abilities, are going to get bolstered at about the halfway mark, where it's going to start fighting a little bit more ferociously, firing more blasts at a time, as well as significantly more wind gusts. Overall, Windblight Ganon isn't necessarily the hardest of the bosses out there, but it is going to be... it's a necessary step towards completion here. And because I have the time, I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about what this run has ended up being. What I had expected versus what actually ended up happening. The first major thing I wanted to mention was difficulty. In my head, when I had first started this, I just kind of laughed it off and said, oh, it's going to be okay. It's just a little bit of patience, just a little bit of focus, a little bit of planning ahead, and it'd be perfectly fine. It'd be more than reasonable to beat the game under these circumstances that I had set out for myself. Not realizing that what I had planned out, what I had said, oh yeah, this will be perfectly fine, would end up absolutely being a mess later down the line. So, I realized pretty early on that it takes a long time to do anything without the use of standard weaponry. And reality is that kind of came to a head in that I stopped trying to fight most bosses. Most enemy encounters, I tried to find ways around that would use more logical answers, like using lightning during a storm to keep enemies at bay or something of that nature. It ended up being more of a technical run rather than a raw power type of run. So I will say that it definitely forced me to play in a way that I otherwise wouldn't have engaged with. We'll start with that. Some areas didn't change much. Eventide Island I approached in the same way that I would any other run of Breath of the Wild. So for me, it didn't really make much of a difference. But for some, not all, but for some, this would become a point of contention with that region. The areas that I think got the most difficult or the most difference from how I would ordinarily approach them were the combat shrines. The combat shrines are, quite simply, too much to do in a feasible or reasonable amount of time. They are significantly harder than what I think the game initially set out to do. And nowhere is this kind of more apparent than when it came down to fighting a major test of strength, and it takes 15 to 20 minutes. Simply because of their raw power. And I'm just throwing bombs left, right, and center trying to do any semblance of damage to these guys, but it just never worked. At least not the way I had envisioned. Other shrines, like major puzzle shrines, typically had either one of three basic solutions. Either the bombs did enough on their own, a fusion of bombs and magnesis did the trick, or some semblance of the various rune combinations worked. Or they required a bow in some capacity, which made most of the incompletable shrines require some form of a bow. Now, as this is a minimum weapon run, I haven't used a sword, bow, or shield in the entire run as a whole. Thus, it really has been more about what is capable of being accomplished with my limited tools. The sword isn't necessarily that hard to get around. Spears, swords, boomerangs, etc. were never used in any capacity. And because I had a damage alternative in the form of the bombs, the magnesis, the what have you, even weather effects, I didn't really see the damage dealing side being that big of an issue. The bow, on the other hand, ended up being far more significant of a change than I had anticipated. For one, I couldn't actually access any of the 4 divine beasts at all. Now, part of this is because the divine beast of fire, Botw, required the use of a heavy weapon of some variety, a hammer, a large sword, something, to access. And that was fine. At least I thought. But it didn't really end up achieving what I had initially set out to achieve. So I couldn't complete that shrine. Okay, whoop-de-doo, one shrine, or one trial didn't work out the way I hoped. Okay. How about, what's the next section? Varuta? I could not use lightning arrows. And I cannot drop anything of the, whatchamacallit, electric shoe jelly while in midair. So I couldn't use them either. Which meant I didn't have the ability to activate Varudanya's pillars, which effectively meant that I couldn't access Varuta either. Cool. What about the next one, Meadow? Meadow required the use of the bow at the shooting range, or shooting gallery, to be able to get Teba's assistance to even get up there. Meaning, once again, I was hooplawed. So, that's 3 of the 4. The one I thought I might be able to access was Vanaboris, but standard bombs didn't allow me to be able to access Vanaboris either, meaning that none of the 4 divine beasts actually worked the way I had hoped. This has led to the fact that the Wind Blight Ganon, Fire, Thunder, and Water all appear in the final battle itself, making this a significantly longer gauntlet than I would have otherwise wanted it to be. So, there's my negative side of all of this. And we have reached the end of the first phase. And I just want to go on record and say that I'm pretty sure that Link in this has been fighting for, or will end up fighting for somewhere close to a week straight. I have to double check when the battle started in time, but I'm pretty sure it was like 7 p.m. or something. Which means already, Link has been fighting Windblight Ganon for like 12 hours straight. And when you put time dilation in, these battles are actually significantly longer than what you might actually think. And I don't necessarily know how long it ends up being, but if I recall, every 20 minutes is 1 day in-game. So, yeah, that's a lot. I forgot about Windblight Ganon's little turrets. See, the weakness of Windblight Ganon is, in part, just the bow and arrow. The idea was that the bow would allow Link to be able to not only fight Windblight itself, but also knock down the little turrets, which could, theoretically, deal damage back to Windblight Ganon. Now, the big issue I have with that actually comes down to the fact that Windblight Ganon doesn't really have a whole lot of anything going for it outside of its turrets and its long-range ability. The other side of it is that, theoretically, the Windblight Ganon defeated Revali, and if its weakness was arrows and bows to begin with, then I don't really see how Revali would have failed. Now, it is stated in canon that Windblight Ganon was fought at night, and the Rito apparently have very poor night vision, which is probably how Windblight won, simply due to the fact that it was a dark, I believe it was also a stormy night, meaning that Revali was effectively fighting blind, slower than normal, and on top of all that, also ended up fighting an enemy that was fairly immune to its to his ability to attack in a battle of attrition. Windblight Ganon has significantly better defenses than most of the enemies that Revali would have ever fought before. Revali, for lack of better terminology, would have been more than capable of defeating Windblight Ganon during the day. But given a more, shall I call it, strategic or long-running battle, Windblight Ganon had the advantage simply due to the fact that Windblight Ganon had all of the effects, the weather, the everything else in its favor. Anywho, we're nearing the end of the Windblight Ganon battle. So, 1 mostly down, and 5 to go? So, there was a theory that cropped up that I came across earlier today. And this theory actually states that the Breath of the Wild Tears of the Kingdom Link was never a chosen hero. And there are 2 sides to this story that I kind of like. The first states that this is one of the few Links that is right-handed, the only other ones being the motion-controlled Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword Links. And this right-handed Link, to me, signifies a little bit more as to how this system would work. See, they made it so that Link was right-handed in the motion control games, due to the fact that most humans are right-handed or have been trained to be right-handed. A left-handed swordsman in virtually all of history was seen as a bad omen, but also incredibly strong due to the fact that most individuals who fought in sword-to-sword battles were used to fighting right-handed swordsmen. Link being a right-handed swordsman in Breath of the Wild speaks a little bit more to prior military training. See, Link was chosen not by the goddesses or whatnot, but by Hyrule's royal family, seeing as how Link at a very young age was capable of defeating trained knights in one-on-one combat with little more than a stick. So, this Link didn't necessarily have the same level of strength or chosen power that other Links did. This is kind of the first and foremost statement. he was chosen primarily by his innate capabilities as a fighter by the royal family instead. Waterblight Ganon has joined the fray. Waterblight's primary weakness is Cryonis, but its Cryonis capabilities are more so based on the fact that Waterblight Ganon has, in the second phase, projectiles that it will throw at you that require being shut down or broken before they ever reach you. Bombs can do the trick, but it is much easier to aim Cryonis. Waterblight's primary strength comes from the fact of its absurd... I've never done a perfect dodge the entire game. I'm sorry, what? That's absurd. Anyways, Cryonis has much better targeting. Waterblight Ganon has better range than virtually every other Blight Ganon in the game up to this point. So, effectively, we're going to be using food and whatnot over time, healing up, and using whatever I possibly can to try to get a leg up in battle over Waterblight. And, ow. Anyways, as I was saying, Link in Breath of the Wild has a couple other things that aren't really going for him. The first being the resistance of the Master Sword itself. Now, in Breath of the Wild, the Master Sword tests Link's vitality, having to have a minimum of 13 hearts to get the Master Sword at all. This test of vitality is primarily what people point at for saying that Link isn't strong enough to wield the Master Sword, or isn't meant to wield it. Now, I kind of like this theory as far as the why things don't work out quite the way you expect in Breath of the Wild. But I also think that it is somewhat bloated in terms of its expectations. Link has always had to have some form of test to get the Master Sword. Skyward Sword had him literally build the Master Sword. Ocarina of Time had him collect the 3 spiritual stones. Not only Wind Waker had him collect the 3 pearls and challenge the trial of the gods before he ever reached the Master Sword. Twilight Princess had him collect and defeat 3 separate beasties, collect the fused shadows, and collect the Master Sword thereafter. Effectively, Twilight Princess had a trial as well. When you look at A Link to the Past and A Link Between Worlds, he had to collect various pendants to be able to access the Master Sword as well. So, there's always been some form of trial for Link to receive the Master Sword at all. Tears of the Kingdom took it and less of a trial of raw vitality, but more of a test of endurance. Now, I appreciate the test of endurance more so than the test of vitality. Partially because this Link has already proven he has the vitality to be able to hold and wield the Master Sword properly. But that Link didn't had to pull the Master Sword from the head of a golden dragon, which, to me, requires a level of endurance to be able to get the sword before the dragon knocked him off, effectively. So, there we go. There's kind of my theory. This Link, instead, focusing in on a test of vitality instead of a test of, what has he collected, what has he completed, to me, speaks more so to the gameplay style of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. being more about incremental increases to strength rather than bulk raw changes. If you look at how Ocarina of Time, Twilight Princess, Wind Waker, etc. all kind of function separately, each of those individual versions of Link had something going for them separately. Ow. And each of those versions had some prior trial that led them to it. Some story beat that led them to the Master Sword. And if you're playing Breath of the Wild, most players know of the Master Sword and know kind of the general vicinity that they would be expecting to find it. There is no doubt in my mind that people were expecting to find the Master Sword in Breath of the Wild in the forest. But whether or not they had taken enough time to really build their character and get Link to a level of vitality necessary to get the Master Sword was a totally separate problem, and one that I think makes a lot of sense as to why this Link had a separate, or dare I say, unique trial for him. The other piece of evidence that people tend to point to for Link not being a true hero within The Legend of Zelda as far as the chosen by the goddess side of things goes is that this version of Link has a typically blue tunic. And okay, that's a fair statement. But the problem that I see with that, and the one that a lot of people don't necessarily consider, is the fact that this blue tunic is entirely based on the fact that Link has effectively been forced to be in his green of fields for years. They always tried to find ways to make him stick out. His green was darker than the grass in Ocarina of Time. It was a very pastel color in Skyward Sword. It was very dark in Twilight Princess. It was very vibrant in Wind Waker. It was lighter than its surroundings in the 2D games, or it was entirely replaced at times for different colored tunics to make it stick out in different environments. There's always been habits of the developers to make Link stick out. But the problem is that they were struggling a little bit with Breath of the Wild with its slightly more realistic art style than Skyward Sword, but more colory and more brightly colored and pastel in in Breath of the Wild compared to Twilight Princess. They were struggling with its art style to make this tunic pop properly. And they thought, well, what could we do? We could go with the classic tunic, which actually ends up being a bonus gift for the player if you manage to collect all 120 shrines. But the problem then becomes, well, how much are we actually getting out of this? How much can we actually make this character pop? And it turned out that the easiest way to make it work was to make Breath of the Wild's tunic blue, because it stuck out in most environments. The icy wastes, the blue ended up sticking out better simply because it was a more vibrant, or in this case, a darker color than what came before it. But also, you have the you have the blue sticking out among the greens of the grasses, you have the blue sticking out in the desert, you have the blue sticking out in the mountains and the forests. Therefore, this version, the color choice of the blue tunic in Breath of the Wild was never intended to showcase or change how Link was perceived as far as position or anything like that. It was meant to be an artistic styling meant to make Link stand out throughout the entirety of his journey. Versus what would originally or stereotypically be his coloring. So, in my opinion, it was never about his position. It always had to do with the fact that Link had other means of sticking out in the various other games. It just so happens that this particular one had a artistic vision that made him stick out in different ways. Anywho, we are at the halfway point of the Water Blight Ganon. The first 24 hours of dueling has officially passed in terms of in-game time. Water Blight Ganon is, I suppose, doing pretty okay. As far as my general expectation is, it's been pretty okay. The battles themselves have been avoiding a lot of damage overall, but I haven't really been able to make that big of a dent on this guy, comparatively to what I would like to have made. But Water Blight so far has been pretty okay. As far as how things go, Water Blight Ganon was battling Mipha. Now, Mipha is, in my opinion, not as strong of a warrior as Urbosa, Daruk, and Revali. Now, part of this is because I believe that she also had the secondary function of having healing magic applied to her as well. She was, in part, the medic of the team. If you would look at each of the individuals, you had a ranger, a brawler, or a ranger, a brawler, a tank, and a healer within the four champions. The tank being Daruk, the brawler being Urbosa, the ranger being Revali, and the healer being Mipha. Mipha didn't necessarily have the same level of combative strength as the rest of them. Not to say that she was weak, just that her strength typically lied elsewhere. Now, Mipha as a character is actually one of my favorite of the four champions. To me, Mipha felt more pragmatic. She felt more intentional. Her actions betrayed a level of understanding and trust, not just in herself, but in her companions, that made her more believable, more approachable to me. She was the type of character that I was drawn to simply because she made sense. Water Blight, having the superior range, meant that it was capable of taking out what I would deem to be a much faster foe in the form of Mipha. Mipha, being a Zora in a typically water-based arena, would have absolutely decimated Water Blight Ganon. But the problem is that Water Blight Ganon didn't, or had an arena that was dry in the beginning of the duel. Couple that with it being an aerial opponent means that Mipha didn't necessarily have the best of arenas for said battle. To me, Mipha had potential to defeat Water Blight in and of itself. But due to the, shall I say, lack of combative experience, the superior range of Water Blight, and the fact that if it were a water-based battle, it had the ability to activate a Cryonis-based rune, meant that Water Blight always kind of had an answer to anything that Mipha could do, making Water Blight Ganon probably the best suited to tackle Mipha on a one-on-one basis. That's kind of my opinion on it. So, overall, Water Blight Ganon defeats Mipha pretty easily. As far as the combat one-on-one style situation ends up being. But, you know, be that as it may, Water Blight Ganon is very much just a... I want to say it's kind of the most average of the four. There's nothing that stands out for Water Blight that really makes it pop in the way that the other three did. Like, Fire Blight can create plumes of flame and effectively thrives in the center of a volcano. That's not exactly the type of damage that you're going to get out of a typical enemy in Water Blight Ganon or whatnot. You're going to get more over-the-top type of enemies over time. And Water Blight to me is just kind of average. It's got long sweeping attacks, it has a bit more range in terms of basic abilities than most of the Water Blights, or most of the other Blights did in general. That's kind of my 2 cents on it. But Water Blight is easily probably second weakest of the 4. In my opinion, the weakest, at least in this particular run, comes up next. Now, the 4 Divine Beasts and their 4 Blights had strengths and weaknesses. Each of them had something that they did well and something that they did poorly. But the thing is that the weakest of the 4 is by far Fire Blight Ganon. Now, the reason is pretty simplistic, actually. The weakness of Fire Blight? Bombs. Therefore, any player can access and defeat Fire Blight rather easily, because Fire Blight Ganon will just teleport, go to its next location, try to attack, and would you look at that, he's stunned again. So it ends up being this circumstance where every time you turn around, every time he tries to get himself back up, tries to get a leg up on his opponent, he just kind of fish flops. And so, in a standard run, Fire Blight is already considerably weaker than the other 3. In this run, Fire Blight Ganon is a footnote. There's really nothing Fire Blight Ganon can do that is going to make you really move forward in the way that prior versions of Ganon would. He's just kind of there. You can do an absurd amount of damage to him over time. Yes, he has the Fire Blade. Yes, he has flame tornadoes and uses his hair at times as a weapon. But Fire Blight Ganon just doesn't have the longevity or the staying power that the other 3 do. And so, for that reason, primarily, I have to give Fire Blight Ganon the weakest of the 4 Divine Beast boss battles, or the Blight Ganons. In my opinion, the second is Water Blight, second strongest is Wind, and the strongest by far is Thunder Blight. And I'll explain that in due time, but know that for now, we're just gonna punish Fire Blight for the sake of punishing Fire Blight, because this has been a long time coming, and I really wanted to, make a good impression. Anywho, with all of that in mind, Fire Blight Ganon is kind of just a footnote. So, while we get at it, I want to talk a little bit about Daruk. Now, Daruk and Fire Blight's battle, I still am trying to figure out how it could have happened. See, Daruk is very much a brute force type of fighter, based on my expectations. He has Daruk's protection, meaning that in many cases I believe that he just stood and took Fire Blight's attacks. To me, that was the biggest flaw with the character's combat scenario. See, Fireblight Ganon doesn't necessarily have the best of defense, but it does have a lot more options in terms of long range and offense. Theoretically, how I see this battle going is that Fireblight Ganon ends up being more of a... how do I put it? Because he ends up being more aggressively focused, it ends up falling directly into, well, when is Daruk going to have a chance to fight back? And as such, Daruk ended up turtling for too long and wearing himself down. In which case, Fireblight Ganon would be able to get the leg up on Daruk and win the fight. At least that's how I foresee their battle having went. But I don't necessarily know any of how these battles would have went. My guesstimations are based primarily on my experiences battling these various entities and trying to make sense of how the battle would have went if it were me saying, yeah, this is how it goes. Fireblight's primary weakness being bombs, the red aura around it is very similar to Daruk's protection. It doesn't allow arrows through. It doesn't allow standard sword strikes through. It doesn't allow effectively anything through unintentionally. And during this time, it charges up a King Dodongo style fireball. And yeah, it worked wonderfully. So the King Dodongo style fireball, it pulls in small bits of debris, including but not limited to bombs, which can knock Fireblight out of the sky and lead to effectively defeating the enemy far more precisely and concisely than other versions of battle could. Meaning, Fireblight is, again, a footnote. There's nothing he's really been able to do or will be able to do against me. Now, can I hurt myself during this battle? Absolutely. I have a bad habit of hurting myself and throwing bombs a little too close. But, you know, par for the course, occupational hazard, if you will. I suppose my favorite part about this battle just comes down to the fact that every time I play it, I challenge games in a slightly different way. In Breath of the Wild's, my first run was all about 20 hearts. Get as much as possible and see what I can get into. My second run was, okay, well, let's see how weak I can be. And I beat the game with 3 hearts. And then I thought, you know, 3 hearts was fun, but I want to collect everything. So I collected everything. All 900 Koroks included, which, honestly, that's an entirely different mess to go through. And then, after collecting all 900 Koroks, I came to the conclusion that I didn't really know what the next run would be, because I had always kind of focused on the same kind of gameplay loop, where I would fight my enemies with what was typically my weakest weapon I had, so that I could, over time, increase the strength of my weaponry overall, to the point where I had like 5 of the Royal Guard greatswords, just because I could. But I didn't use them very often. I didn't use my elemental weapons very often because I thought that they were incredibly rare. I didn't use my various tools to their greatest potential because there's always a chance that I'll need them later. This is one of my greatest weaknesses as a gamer, is that I am the type of person who always says, well, I'll need it later, I might need it later. And so, I don't use consumables to the degree that I possibly could. Now, I think part of it is just a psychology problem, where it feels as though video games have these limited resources of, I might need this later. And so your options, the options of the developers are effectively make the resource so rare that you have to use it at certain times, and it's, you know, it's more of a gameplay niche, or make it so abundant that you let your players know that this is replaceable, use it, please. I am of the individual set that there needs to be consequences for not using it and using it too much. But that's neither here nor there. Welcome to the true reason why this is a 2-hour-long battle. Thunderblight Ganon. Thunderblight is an absolute mess. So the problem that we run into with Thunderblight has to do with its combat style. Thunderblight Ganon has two basic abilities. He'll fly up into the air and throw a lightning ball at you, or he'll charge at you and do a single, double, triple, whatever swing he does. If you get a perfect dodge, you can get one hit in before he disappears. If you don't perfect dodge him, your only chance of dealing damage are when he flies into the air. This makes Thunderblight a significantly longer, slower battle than virtually all other entities up to this point. You can't use arrows or bombs or whatnot during other animations because he'll simply block it. Meaning, this, among all of the other versions of the Blights, is by far the strongest, the greatest battle of attrition, and the one that truly tested the limits of my willpower and patience. Because Thunderblight, for lack of better terminology, is by far and away the most defensively minded of the four, the fastest of the four, and the one that is the hardest to beat on a one-on-one, requiring the use of tools like the perfect dodge to be able to get at him at all, requiring better handling of your character in virtually any and all circumstances to be able to make him even remotely reasonable to duel. Thunderblight Ganon is and will forever be the greatest pain in my rear end in all of Breath of the Wild. And it's not even a remotely close circumstance with this one. So, how does he defeat Urbosa? Well, rather handily, actually. Urbosa is the DPS of the party. If we're going with a standard D&D style or RPG style 4-character party, Urbosa is damage dealer. Close range, reasonably fast, and her ability to use lightning with a snap of her fingers as a long-ranged option makes her actually fairly versatile. Thunderblight, however, has speed that allows it to battle on par with Urbosa in many circumstances, not just the one-offs. Now, the reason I want to bring this up is because Thunderblight, rather than using raw power, rather than using elements of surprise or range as its strategy against Urbosa, Thunderblight used speed. Speed that was capable of making Urbosa's lightning near useless because it would just dodge it. Speed that meant that any swing of the sword that Urbosa threw at Thunderblight was effectively blocked. Speed that made any attempt at dealing damage to Thunderblight pointless. That is the problem with Thunderblight as a whole. Now, we've beaten approximately 1/6 of it in this span of time. But you gotta realize that at this point, I've been dueling the Blights for 45 minutes. In-game, Link has been dueling the Blights for 2 days straight, which honestly is a testament to his strength. But also, I've been dueling these bosses for 2 solid days in-game. That's an absurd amount of time. A insane amount of just working for the sake of working. And so, to me, this also kind of points to the fact that Link is not your average individual. He has an absurd vitality. He has absurd durability. He has an absurd stamina. And this, in my mind, proves it. The fact that he can still duel with Thunderblight 2 days into battling the Blight Ganons, to me, only strengthens my belief that this version of Link could easily be considered among the heroes of legend. Speaking of heroes of legend, I want to talk about the timeline. Now, let's be real. The timeline is something that everybody's heard of. It's one of the most contentious pieces of Zelda in everything. And the reality is that each of these games has a storyline that is tangentially related to another, where people can piece together bits and pieces, threads of information throughout the duration of the game for the sake of, yeah, this is what it is. You get information. You get information through the threads, the bits and pieces that kind of fit, but each legend, each story doesn't really tie back to the whole as well as it possibly could. Yeah, okay, you have a pigman in this one. You defeated him, he's trying to get revived here. Cool, you defeated him, he's trying to get revived again. This is effectively what the timeline has boiled down to. And so, in that regard, every single time that you defeat a entity, a big bad evil guy, in Zelda as a whole, there's really not a whole lot of connective tissue between them. Now, the biggest contentions of this include the ones that either have the same link or, in the case of the Four Swords trilogy, Minish Cap, Four Sword, and Four Swords Adventures all tie in together simply because of the blade itself that's being used and the Botw trilogy, if you will. The 2 games, Oracle of Ages and Seasons, could be tied together, but you can play them in any order. You can play A Link to the Past before A Link's Awakening, and it would make sense. You can play Link's Awakening before A Link to the Past, and it would make sense. You could play Ocarina of Time after Majora's Mask, and it would make sense. This is, so to speak, every game is a lot more self-contained. They're a lot more self-contained than we are led to believe via the timeline. And so, each game is just that, effectively. A legend, a story, a telling of some either event or even an explanation of why it is said that the hero has a hat. Like, why do we need a story behind that? What is the story behind this so-called mythical blade called the Master Sword? What happened? Why is it that we believe there was a great flood? Well, there was all this salt on the ground. Why is it that we believe that there is more to this or that than otherwise expected or otherwise stated? They're just legends, myths, pieces of information that tie the world of Zelda together in some capacity. They don't necessarily do much. They don't tell you anything beyond what I would consider to be the apparent, the basic. They are a story of what was, what shall be kind of thing. And in that way, there doesn't need to be a timeline. because every single game stands on its own 2 feet. Every single game. Now there are some mild exceptions, but even Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild have enough degrees of separation that you could, in theory, play them totally opposite and still get something out of each game. You might be able to point at it and say, this world looks oddly familiar, but that's it. That is the extent of why I believe you could play them in any general option or any order. Because aside from a couple characters like, who is it? Teba's son, Tulin getting older, or Riju, Tulin and Riju getting older, there's really not much to showcase the passage of time between these 2 games. In fact, it's only been, 2 years at max? So, in the end, these games are more akin to 2 separate games within a same universe than they are a direct sequel to one another. That's my, I suppose, neither here nor there, but that's kind of my opinion on it. And to be clear, my opinion has changed over decades of playing these games. Simply because I was a staunch believer that every story has a beginning, middle, and end. But in the words of Tim Burton, that's not always in that order. What that effectively means, to me, is that we all kind of have there's always going to be more to a story than we might think, than what we might outwardly say. But that doesn't necessarily mean a whole lot. In this particular case, each story has a purpose, a meaning, but they don't need to be told in that precise way. And so, for me, that's kind of why Zelda is as special as it is. Each game reflects a little bit of who each player is. Each game has very much a right to be considered somebody's favorite. Every single game in Zelda history has a chance of being something more, something bigger than the sum of its parts. And to me, that is important. To me, that makes Zelda fantastic in comparison to a lot of other games out there. There is a reason that every game could be someone's favorite. And sure, my favorite is Twilight Princess. I won't argue that. I'm not going to say that it's the one that everybody should love. But I can also understand why Wind Waker, Ocarina of Time, Skyward Sword, even the Minish Cap is somebody's favorite. I remember at one point in time, my favorite was one of the DS ones, Phantom Hourglass, because I liked speedrunning and challenging myself to complete the Temple of the Ocean King as fast as possible. I lived for these types of challenges and tried to approach games in a certain way. And was it proper? Did it work the way I wanted? Not every time. But there were enough times that I played each game that I thought, this is amazing, that I could easily say that any game in the franchise could be your favorite, and you would not, and I wouldn't bat an eye. There's no argument in my mind. Anywho, we are about halfway done fighting Thunderblight. And to kind of iterate how long it has been fighting Thunderblight, we are at the 15-minute mark, which is longer than the time it took. We're less than halfway done fighting Thunderblight, and it is longer than the time it took to defeat Wind or Water in their entirety. Which I think stands to reason that Thunderblight is the biggest pain in the butt. Yes, I could have cut a lot of this out, but I'm gonna be very honest, I this being the last battle, the last episode, I figured let's leave it all here. It's the last bit of proof that it is possible to beat the game with minimum weapons. But what are minimum weapons? Well, I have mentioned it in the past, but I feel it bears repeating at this moment. You are required a minimum of 2 weapons, traditional weapons. In this case, swords, shields, and bows all count as weapons. You need 1 bow. The Bow of Light is provided to you during the final battle with Beast Form Cannon. And so the Beast Form Cannon requires a bow. And the Calamity Ganon, the full Calamity Ganon, requires the use of either Urbosa's Fury or a shield. One or the other, it doesn't matter which. But to get Urbosa's Fury would require the use of a second bow. Therefore, will require the use of a second bow and a sword of some variety. Therefore, that option is out. So, the shield it is. That's kind of how I justified getting the shield over alternatives was what would it take to do the alternative. Unfortunately, that means that perfect parries and the shield are necessary for the final boss. Which sucks, because I would like for it to be a no weapon period anything run. That's just not feasible, that's not reasonable to assume. And so I knew from fairly early on that this was going to be a challenge in a different light. Anywho, Thunderblight is kind of being a little bit of a brat. But I don't really mind it too much at this point. It's gotten to a point that it's muscle memory. I can dodge pretty consistently and avoid most of his attacks without too much of an issue. But let's be real. We want to finish him off as fast as possible. And the second half of his boss battle is going to get worse. See, Thunderblight Ganon's second half, I wish that it dropped the lightning pillars more. See, the lightning pillars are what really sets this version apart. See, Thunderblight's whole gambit is I have electrified weaponry, electrified tools that deal damage for me. And so, by being able to deal with Thunderblight Ganon using the electrified tools, you are effectively able to take out a significant portion of its health rather easily. But you also have the issue of Thunderblight Ganon has now an extra layer to its attack. The 3-swing version, which requires a minimum of 2 dodges. It has access to using its shield as a bashing weapon. And it now has access to a 5-swing version of its Flurry Strike. Meaning that from this point onward, it is a battle of attrition. How long can I survive before Thunderblight takes me down? I don't know, and I will not know. Thunderblight, unfortunately, is going to, from here on out, whittle me down constantly. My only hope is that I can slowly but surely take him down and win the battle of attrition. And that's the terrifying side of this battle, is I know Thunderblight has the capability of defeating me. In fact, there's not a doubt in my mind. Fun fact, this is the second time I fought the bosses, and Thunderblight Ganon was the one that destroyed me in the first attempt. The first 3, were reasonable in some capacity. But Thunderblight Ganon, I didn't even reach the point of having Thunderblight's second ability activate before I was done. And so, to me, that showcases A, just how much better you can get after a single attempt, but also just how powerful Thunderblight actually is. Thunderblight is not a boss that you want to take lightly. It is not one that I would approach with anything less than full force. Because anything less and you will probably be demolished by this guy. Anyways, we're looking pretty okay right now, all things considered. He's absolutely decimating me in the battle of attrition side of things, but I'm also getting enough hits in that he should be down soon. At the very least, Thunderblight didn't have the final battle with Demon King Ganon syndrome, wherein he had a absurdly long, like 7-layer deep health bar. But yeah, it's not fun. Anywho, we're gonna actually activate one of our full health items so that we can keep holding our own against him. Now, the reality is that Thunderblight is the reason why I have full heal items at this point. I realized just how out of my element I was fighting him. And so the only option I really had that made sense was preparing to battle him as if I was battling any other major event. Battling the fire running up the side of Death Mountain, for example. That to me just makes sense. It was a event that required either planning or preparation. Probably both. If you went with the preparation side, you at least had the benefit of I'm just going to eat my way up the mountain and devour every single item in sight. But if you went the planning way, you could have created a fireproof elixir or something of that nature. Whichever version you went with, it was kind of a big push towards the final boss gauntlet, if that makes sense. Anywho, we're just gonna get bashed around by Thunderblight. And yeah, opportunities to deal damage to Thunderblight have decreased immensely now that we are at a point where he's really just destroying us. There is no easy way around Thunderblight when you don't have tools. And with that in mind, it's gonna be a long battle. Ow. But hey, if you stuck around this long, let me know and comment under the E so I can actually see exactly how far you actually did watch for. That'd be greatly appreciated. Anywho, with all of that, there is kind of a couple minor things that came to mind as I've been playing this game over the last few years. And one of them is that Breath of the Wild and its sequel, Tears of the Kingdom, are a reset of sorts. Now, part of this reset theory comes to the idea that the developers wanted to make a game that had a bit more meat to it, a bit more exploration. See, the other Zeldas that they've played over decades, games like Ocarina of Time, have an obscene amount of exploration and world building to them. But the problem is that when you found everything once, you only have about 150 collectibles. And they wanted to make this version of Link, this version of Zelda, bigger and grander than anything that came before it. And in that regard, I've got to say that it's pretty impressive what they're able to accomplish in Breath of the Wild here. That every single character, every single individual has something to them. And I wouldn't necessarily say that every single character or location is treated with the same level of respect. But even how the story of Zoro's Domain is taught through these ancient artifacts and glyphs on the sides of Polymus Mountain all kind of makes for a more all-encompassing experience. That every single individual learns the same legends you do. If not for the same reason, at least through a means that makes sense and is explained through the world itself. See, Hyrule, for lack of better terms, does not have a very well documented written history. I think that's a pretty fair statement to make, because most of Hyrule's history has been through Link's eyes. Most of what we've gathered of Hyrule's history has been the results of simply existing, of simply trying to build up a history and watching the entirety of Hyrule fall on numerous occasions. Hyrule's history has been a messy, bloody, destructive history. Now, part of that is simply that Zelda's world has always been plagued by monsters, has always been plagued by Ganondorf and the general world as a whole falling to pieces on a generational basis. Breath of the Wild just really showcases what actually this world would look like after several generations of these battles happening. And to me, that makes sense. Even down to how their architecture and their mining systems go. That there are artifacts that were hidden away in a time that we have yet to actually see, that were meant to battle against the various forces of Ganon and the monsters that are summoned. Really showcases just how over the top this world has become. Oh, by the way, it's now 3 days straight of dueling for Link, which I believe is over 24 hours of battling Thunderblight in and of itself. So, yay! Go Link, you've got this. Okay, we've reached the D. Don't let that come out the wrong way. But each group even has their own written or storied history, with the Gerudo having their own history that has become one of traders. They're trying to build a better life for the people around them. They're trying to use what little resources they have and became artisans and craftsmen. The Gorons have done as they always have and continued mining and building something to lead towards what we would consider to be better days, showcasing images of Darunia, Daruk, Darbus, etc. on their rock faces. Of course they would have something leading towards a more positive relation with the people around them. It just makes too much sense. And so that's kind of why I believe that each of the various groups kind of pulled themselves up by their bootstraps and showcase that 100 years of devastation means nothing in Hyrule. That they can continue to survive, no, thrive, in the face of adversity. But I also have to ask, what does the future of Zelda bring? I don't necessarily know. See, Zelda has been in a experimental era since the creation of Breath of the Wild. With the most recent Zeldas being Breath of the Wild, Age of Calamity, Tears of the Kingdom, which was it? Age of Extinction? I think it was. No. The newest one for the Switch 2. But effectively, it's this... They've all tied into either the Hero of the Wild or the new Hero of Legend era of Zelda. And this, to me, makes a lot of sense. These two eras are the most recent that we've kind of been teasing and working around with in the duration of the last decade or so. That, to me, showcases that this is probably the direction that they want to go in, period. That these games have now a more in-depth look at what Hyrule could be, but are also trying to provide options and a different style of Zelda that prioritizes player freedom and thought. Prioritizes letting people play the game how they want to play the game. This, to me, is the ultimate sandbox move, where you can do whatever you want within the world. And Breath of the Wild was kind of a really interesting push towards it, approaching the realm of Hyrule much like Elder Scrolls did with Skyrim. But if you also look at it from a slightly different perspective, you can also say that each game has looked at player freedom in a more expansive way than what came before it. Breath of the Wild focused in on exploration and one-on-one combat, but Tears of the Kingdom focused in on the ability to create, on the ability to find solutions in the unexpected. Echoes of Wisdom did much the same thing, except did so with the use of the summonings, or of the echoes throughout the game. So you end up with now multiple games that kind of all push towards this same basic end goal. That being, hey, we want our players to have fun, and they're gonna do it their way no matter how we as developers want them to. So, yeah, in my mind, player freedom is the way that Zelda is going to continue to evolve. Now, I don't believe that player freedom is going to be treated the same way in future games as they have here. I do believe that they've kind of played around with it and are trying to test what the limit of player freedom actually is. But they've at least been experimenting enough to understand that where it is that players kind of reached a point of, okay, this is ridiculous. So, yeah, who knows? Maybe we'll get something a little bit different going forward. I thought I had Thunderblight blocked up there. We're under the U. We're almost there. So close. This is chaos. Oh, yeah. This is the one type of battle where I kind of wish I had Netflix running around in the background just to have a movie or something being played while I was doing this. Simply because this is not the type of battle that can be done easily in a single sitting. Anyways, Thunderblight is almost there. And my food reserves are starting to look a little on the slim side. I think we've gone through about a page worth of food reserves, which isn't bad considering I had 3 full pages of cooked food. But it does not bode well if Calamity Ganon itself is any stronger or weaker than Thunderblight. My guesstimation is that Calamity is going to have more health and deal more damage than Thunderblight will, but ultimately is going to be easier to land a hit on. Anyways, sorry, I'm getting a little parched here. Thunderblight, if I were to put a finger at any enemy in Breath of the Wild being the single strongest, Thunderblight is the one. And it's not even a close matchup, if I'm being honest. Note that I have never actually fought Monk Maz Koshia, but I have dueled most of Breath of the Wild's various bosses that didn't go to Master Mode, and Thunderblight takes the cake, being what I consider to be probably the hardest Zelda boss in the history of Zelda. Now, this isn't to say that there aren't some bosses that might be similarly powerful, but just that Thunderblight is much more offensively minded than a lot of other bosses in Zelda have ever been. Anywho, with all of this being said, what's left? If I were to continue this into the future, what would be the logical conclusion to come to? The first would be just play the game as normal. The reality is that I've kind of come to the conclusion that a run of this nature just is not as fun and enjoyable on a player basis as dueling and playing the game with full capacity in mind. Sure, I could use spears, or I could use a slightly different type of tool, but ultimately it'll come down to virtually the same problem. I am going to be playing the game with some form of similar tools to what I am. And after beating the entire game with next to no gear, there's no point in my mind going back and saying, yeah, I can do better than this. I can do something different. I could beat the entirety of Zelda Breath of the Wild without the use of any weapons or food. That's absurd. I'm not going to do that. I've tested the waters enough that I know what my limitations are, and that's a limitation I don't want to test. Hey, bomb. Looks more like a bowling ball. Anyways, Thunderblight is driving me mad here. You know, one of my earliest deaths in this had to come from a Guardian. And I truly believe that the Thunderblights, or rather the Blight Ganons, are a fusion of a Guardian in some capacity, along with the soul of the champion that was created from them. Or that they fought. See, Windblight Ganon focuses very heavily on long-range tactics. Rivali was also a long-range duelist. You could say that Mipha had half-decent range and control over water. And it just so happens that Waterblight Ganon has long range, or longer melee range, and control over water, at least in the form of Cryonis. And you could say that Thunderblight has high speed, good close range combat, and access to one of the more potent long-range abilities in the form of the lightning capabilities of Urbosa. And I even mentioned prior that the Fireblight Ganon had access to a version of Daruk's protection. Effectively, each of the champions ended up inadvertently giving their champion powers to one of the four divine to one of the 4 Divine Beast Blights, and each of the Blights took advantage of it in full. Anyways, if I were to pick a Zelda entity, a series of enemies or something that would be stronger than what I'm currently fighting, I would say that fighting all of the Blights at once would be the only true way to make a boss that is stronger than any of the individuals. Unfortunately, fighting a standard Botw with Thunderblight standing around really isn't going to do much. Fighting a standard enemy while also fighting a Blight isn't going to change the Blight's dual... Wait, are you kidding me? Have I been fighting the Thunderblight wrong this whole time? Yeah, I've been fighting him wrong this whole time. Oh no! Whatever will you do while I just slowly walk away? Yep, I've been fighting him wrong this whole time. Well, that's embarrassing. Comment down below if you got to the point where I've been fighting him wrong the whole time. So, Thunderblight's greatest weakness is just people being aware of the fact that he is pretty stationary while he's swinging his sword around. That would have been great information to have earlier, and might have actually sped up the battle with Thunderblight exponentially. Oh well, you live and learn. Anyways, with Thunderblight effectively defeated, by the way, we're now at the 4-day mark, so we spent 2 full days fighting Thunderblight. We are going to be getting into the final battle. And I think it stands to reason when I say just how ridiculously powerful Thunderblight was, that the last couple of fights, the last couple of challenges that come our way aren't going to be that hard. Aren't going to really push too much harder than what has already been done. So, hooray for that. Thunderblight Ganon is going down, and if I could pick an element that would work well against him, my immediate thought is that, well, there really isn't much. See, unlike some battles in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom as a whole, there are certain circumstances where each entity is stronger or weaker based on what elemental or weapon you're using. An example being that ice-based enemies are weak to fire. Fire-based enemies are weak to ice. Thunder-based enemies are great in aqueous environments, but that's it. That's as far as they go. Electric-based enemies don't really show up all too often, and they don't necessarily have a major weakness. So, to me, the weakness of an electric-based enemy has always been range, or at least the closest thing you have to a weakness. Now, I can't necessarily say one way or the other whether this is true, but I also believe that the thunder-based enemies had some level of higher or lower defense as well, which made them more reasonable to defeat in a one-on-one duel. At least, that's what I would like to say. But, again, I don't actually know. I just am kind of hopeful in that regard. Anyway, we've hit the TH, and, yeah. It's going pretty well overall. Definitely could be a lot worse. And we are going to tackle the last form of Ganon in the near future, because we gotta finish this sometime soon. Haha, you can't get me, na-na-na-na boo-boo. Going into the future, will I attempt a run of I don't believe I will attempt a run of a similar nature in at least a Zelda game for the foreseeable future. There might be a chance of me trying a swordless run in Ocarina of Time or Wind Waker, but that is quite a ways away. Reality is I'm not too eager to attempt a challenge of this nature right away. I wouldn't mind doing something of a similar nature in a different genre of game, like for example, maybe Witcher 3. But I feel like if I were to do something of this nature in another game at all, it's going to end up being a monumental task. And it's going to be one that is Herculean in nature, not one that I think I will necessarily do just on a whim. Anywho. Thunderblight, can you please go down? Please? I want to showcase something other than the throne room that we've been in for the last hour and a half. Finally. Anyways, I'm gonna let this play out.
Link. I'm sorry, but my power isn't strong enough. I can't hold.
Welcome, one and all, to the battle with Calamity Ganon. And finally, we get to challenge the true antagonist of this run itself. Now, Calamity Ganon is more powerful and more unique than I think most of the other entities in this game end up being. Calamity Ganon has higher defense, higher health pool, and has a, dare I say, spider-like appearance that makes him very imposing. On top of that, Mr. Calamity Ganon also has access to each of the 4 lights abilities in some capacity. Okay, we're gonna be using the shield here soon. Ow, that was my face. So as I say, he has access to each of the other 4 lights abilities. From Fireblight, he gets the fireball behind me. From Fireblight, he gets the toasty red sword. From Windblight, he gains access to the cannon and the wind strike, as well as the massive tornadoes. From Waterblight, he gains access to the spear, which he uses in both I believe it's in a mid-range capacity, as well as a big stabby motion. And the hardest of them to actually figure out what he has access to is the Thunderblight. And it's partially because during the battle, he is going to be dropping Thunderblight's pillars, the steel beams. And so we gain access to that side of Thunderblight as well. All in all, Calamity Ganon is a force to be reckoned with. The last hour and a half have been spent fighting versions of these entities. And only now are we actually able to duel Calamity Ganon itself. Now, on the wall, Calamity Ganon is one of the most dangerous foes that you can get. Output of your damage is not going to match the output of his damage. However, you do have a little bit of a bonus when dealing with Calamity Ganon in the form of updraft. Unlike the other versions of the Blights throughout the duration of the battle, this version creates updrafts during said battle that allow you to have the edge in terms of aerial combat. Which, short version is, saves you a lot of time and a lot of health. So in that regard, we do have an option for forward momentum. But it's going to be a bit more long-standing. Okay, so we're just gonna, hold on to this. There we go. And bang! So, the Blast of Lightning is actually a lot stronger than one might think. I was expecting it to do more than it did, but it definitely does something. So, overall, Calamity Ganon is actually a pretty decent opponent to have to face off against, in my opinion. But there is something that bugs me about fighting Calamity Ganon, and it is that technically fighting Calamity Ganon doesn't actually solve anything. You aren't fighting an entity that is stronger than you or anything of that nature. You're not even fighting the original. Yay! First perfect guard. You are fighting the incarnation of hatred that came up from Ganon, who is locked in the catacombs below Hyrule Castle. So effectively, you're not even facing off against an entity that is... Oh! Yay! You also get the Cryonis from Frosty Ganon, or from Water Blight. Perfect. There we go. Anyways, as I was saying, you don't even fight the original. Fighting Calamity Ganon just prolongs the inevitable, as it tends to in the mythos of Zelda. Every time you fight Ganon, every time you fight an incarnation of Ganon, every time you fight some version of Ganondorf, there's ultimately no longevity to that victory. You will win your battle, and then 100 years from now, they're gonna fight the same fight that you did. Now, part of this has to do with the fact that the various battles with Ganon are done in a way that is intended to be, one-off resealing type of circumstances. Ganondorf is just that powerful of an entity within Zelda lore as a whole. But it's not something that I necessarily feel gets the attention it deserves either. There is no defeating Ganondorf. There is no destroying Ganon. He is defeated a total of 4 times now, throughout the 3 times throughout the entirety of Zelda that I can actively point at and say this was it. The first is Wind Waker. Makes sense. He's not only KO'd, but sealed within ancient Hyrule. Fine. I can get behind that. The second is the duel in, Twilight Princess, wherein you're dueling against him and you just casually kind of blast him and knock him to the ground as you would any other time you fight him. Ocarina of Time, he's sealed away. Four Swords Adventures, sealed away. Link to the Past is also a KO. So Link to the Past is a KO. You have the resealing or redefeat of him in the Oracle games. Link's Awakening doesn't show up. He was sealed prior to the, why are there bomb air? Interesting. I just found bomb arrows on the side of the arena, which suggests that the game is trying to tell me that I need to be using stronger weapons for this. It also has a shield dropped on the edge of the arena, almost as if they were expecting me to use it. Interesting. Small details aside, each of the Ganons that you fight, most of them end up being resealed away in some capacity. Calamity Ganon isn't even broken free from the seal. This is a sealed away version of Ganon that is just trying to exert his will on the world above. Effectively, one of the most terrifying villains that you can possibly throw at a video game in general. But there are a couple issues with it. Number one, Calamity Ganon is bulky. He has all the health in the world. He can wait it out and duel you as long as he wants. Man, I gotta get better at this perfect parry. Apparently, playing the game wrong for almost a year does something to your sense of... oh, what's the word? Your sense of timing? Who would have thunk it? But all things being equal, Calamity Ganon is by far and away one of the most powerful versions of Ganon. Now, I've had a theory prior to just kind of the belief that all of the games are separate, that one of the core issues within the Zelda world is that the storyline takes place over decades and has to deal with the curse of demise. The idea that every time Ganondorf, or in this case, every time Incarnation of Demise's hatred rises forth to the surface once more, that the world will be doomed. That everything will go sideways on you, kind of thing. That he will rise from the ashes and bathe the world in a blood-soaked sea of darkness for all eternity. That is the fear that comes along with this. And Mr. Demise created, effectively, Ganondorf, an entity who was intended to be everything but merciful, and said, hey, have fun with this, you guys. He was intended to be... Ganon was intended to be everything Demise wanted to be. And in many ways ends up doing it. In times where Ganon could not, you had entities like Onox, Varan, you had Yuga, you had Botw, we had Bellum, we had Maladus. We've had entities that acted as an incarnation of Ganon's hatred, or of Demise's hatred, for decades, in ways that I don't think we ever really paid attention to. It made sense, given the limited scope of the world that they were in, that there was more at play. And so, for me, being abundantly honest about it, I would like to see more in terms of these non-Ganon villains. Because villains that are Ganon are just another resealing, another entity, or another battle with the same guy. And it's not that I don't think you can. I just also don't believe that there's a purpose in dueling the same guy 17 times. That's my thought on it. But maybe I'm overthinking it. Maybe I'm being a little bit too hard on Zelda as a whole. I have been known to be hard on games in the past. But be that as it may, Ganon, can you come back down here and fight me like a crab? Anyways, Ganon is in general, probably the entity that most of Hyrule and most of gaming should be afraid of. He's not like Bowser. He has vision, he has drive, he has power, he has everything set up and ready to go. Pretty much before Link ever starts trying to help Hyrule. You can actually see this in numerous occasions. In terms of Skyward Sword, we had, whatchamacallit. Skyward Sword had Girahim actively fighting on behalf of Demise to try to unseal Demise from his imprisonment. How he didn't realize where Zelda was despite being a hop, skip, and a jump from Demise, I will never know. But, be that as it may. The second, Botw. Botw's whole plan ends up working around the span of a couple of days, going from effectively just a child or a magical entity to a god of destruction, is entirely part of Botw's worldview and gameplay loop. But you got other circumstances that crop up in much the same way. You have Ocarina of Time, where in the first third of the game, the entity that is Ganondorf has a plan and knows how to execute it, but doesn't know how to get to what he's aiming for. He has suspicions. He knows enough that he could very easily defeat virtually anything that came his way. But there's just this one nagging problem in the back of his mind that he doesn't know how to get to the Sacred Realm, but believes that somebody does, be it Link or Zelda. And reality is this is a perfect depiction of why Ganon is as strong as he is. Wind Waker, his plan was pretty well finished before the midpoint of the game. He had everything he needed planned out to a T right off the hop. And if it wasn't for the fact that the Helmarok King kidnapped Errol instead of Tetra, he would have won. Wind Waker is probably the closest Ganon has ever gotten to achieving his goals of reuniting the Triforce. If you got to Twilight Princess, Ganondorf's goal was his resurrection. He didn't necessarily need to go further, but he opted to. And in the wake of Xant's defeat, he went forth and did more damage to Hyrule than Xant ever could. Effectively, Ganon has always been a threat. If you look at the 2D games, A Link to the Past, he had more or less already succeeded by the end of the first dungeon in the first half of the game. If you look at Phantom Hourglass, Bellum had effectively won. And it just was getting too greedy. If you look at each game, as soon as the main protagonist ends up reaching a point of, yeah, I've gotta go battle, they've already lost, or at least that's what the world itself seems to say. The hero only seems to get engaged in combat or moving towards the goal of defeating the big bad after the big bad has already done everything in its power to reach the pinnacle. Calamity Ganon technically won 100 years prior, and the only reason why Link has a second crack at it is because he got lucky. Ooh, yay, tornado time. This particular Link loses. Now, we have had in the past a couple of different situations where Link could have lost, and it would have been more or less the same. The story of Ocarina of Time, Link loses during the final battle and thus leads to the sealing of Ganon within the Sacred Realm, without the full seal, shall we say, from the Master Sword involved, means that Ganon is effectively still at peak power and gains the power of the Triforce and manipulation outside of the realm he existed in, simply because what else is going to happen? The seal, for lack of better terminology, was incomplete. Now, there is a theory that I've come across as well that kind of ties into this. This idea of the war in Wind Waker that is described in the opening. How Ganon broke free from the chains of his seal from Ocarina of Time and says, hey, yeah, this guy's doing things here, maybe let him. The theory basically goes by the fact that in Ocarina of Time, at the end of the game, Link more or less goes to Termina and he is effectively dueling out with Majora and that storyline. But there was not enough time between the 7 years after Ocarina of Time and the breaking of Ganon's seal for there to be another Link. See, the thing is that the blood of the goddess and the spirit of the hero is tied very heavily to this idea of who is the chosen individual. And the reality is that I think in many cases there's a lot of misinformation. The spirit of the hero is simply anybody who would have the means to take up arms against what would be the incarnation of Demise's hatred in that generation. So, it is more or less a generational problem. The problem is that each time you seal Ganon away, it takes about 20 to 60 years for that seal to weaken. And you can actually see this very, very easily through the Hero of Hyrule and the new Hero of Hyrule. See, after the Hero of Hyrule in A Link to the Past defeats Ganon, they then immediately turn around and try to go about his resurrection. This resurrection that is shown in the Oracle games is entirely the point. After he is resurrected, he is resealed away. And it takes about a generation later, where the new Hero of Hyrule is like the grandson or something of the Link from Link to the Past. So, in that effect, you end up with another Link, another hero, within the span of about 40 years. Ocarina of Time ends up with a situation where the big bad evil guy breaks free from his seal before that 20 to 40 year mark hits. The spirit of the hero still exists, it's just away, no longer in Hyrule. And so in that regard, I do believe that the spirit of the hero has always existed, but not necessarily where he needed to be. Now, this does lead to the fact that every time a hero is resurrected, every time a hero rises to the call of duty, he ends up being a youngin', a child of sorts. Partially because that's the one individual that the big bad evil guy isn't going to take seriously. But partially because the big bad evil guy's plans were probably formulated in some capacity around the time that the hero of legend was born. But what do I know? It's kind of up in the air. These games don't exactly give all the information in a succinct manner. And that is something that Zelda definitely could do with potentially improving. But that's also me being slightly controversial in my choice there. Anywho, Calamity Ganon is getting absolutely bodied by its own lasers, about 40% of the damage that I'm outputting, no, probably about 50. No, we'll go 40%. 40% of the damage that it's being output is going back from the laser damage that he's dealing to himself. Now, what that I think would mean is that Calamity Ganon's greatest weakness in this particular battle is its own strength. Link is not strong in Breath of the Wild, at least not without his gear. He is simply fast and, dare I say, durable at this moment. This Link is fast and durable. He doesn't have the raw power that other players would give him. He doesn't have the capability of doing an absurd amount of damage in 6 seconds flat. He doesn't even have the sword that seals the darkness. If anything, we're not even sure if this version of Link is actually a hero at all. Yeah, might be a little gremlin or something, who knows. But this version of Link is more than capable of defeating Calamity Ganon. But going back to that theory of this Link might not be the hero that people say that he is supposed to be, it all ties back in part to just how he carries himself. Link is powerful, but this Link doesn't have the tools that the past versions ever did. And yes, this is me being a brat and saying, oh, the Master Sword doesn't exist and stuff like that. But this Link doesn't need it. If other Links require the use of absurd magical artifacts to be able to defeat their big bad evil guy, were they ever truly worthy of defeating the big bad evil guy? Sure, I'm pretty sure the magical artifacts do something more to make the big bad evil guy fall faster or more permanently. But in much the same way, the magical artifacts that this version of Link has access to, like the Master Sword, don't have the same level of power that they once did. It's all just, Ocarina of Time's version had a solid Master Sword that ended up being used to smack off of rocks to find hidden pathways. You had tools that broke on a regular basis in this game because they're just mundane farmhand tools most of the time. The versions that we see in later versions of this game also tie back to how powerful is Ganon, how powerful is Link. Because if this Link can beat Ganon with nothing more than farmhand tools, then maybe this version of Ganon isn't the strongest either. But you can also look at the fact that in Tears of the Kingdom the Master Sword is broken in and of itself. That showcases just how much time has passed, how devastated this version of the Master Sword is, how worn out it is. Now there is a theory, I'm speaking a lot about theories today, about how potentially Demise still exists within the Master Sword. That while Demise's soul was sealed within the Master Sword eons ago, the Master Sword simply doesn't have the strength to whittle it down. That it became a duel between the soul of Demise and the soul of Fi, duking it out within the Master Sword that have slowly weakened it over time. Now, in the early series, talking like Ocarina of Time, Twilight Princess, even the various versions from the 2D games, the Master Sword shows up as this penultimate power, a weapon of incredible strength that can obliterate any dark entity with ease. It also starts to revert to a former self each time. It's upgraded and devolved several times in the 2D games over time, simply due to the fact that what can you do when it is slowly being attacked from the inside? This version of the Master Sword has been attacked from the inside, degraded and destroyed for centuries. And so this version of the Master Sword just lacks the power to do what it needs to do. And you can see this on numerous occasions as well. The Twilight Princess version had to be infused with the power of the souls to be able to deal enough damage to Zant to be useful. You had to repower up the Master Sword in Ocarina of Time. In Wind Waker. You had to power up the Master Sword in part in the Hero of Legends and the new Hero of Hyrule's world, shall we say. So, in that regard, Link has just been an exceptionally well-practiced swordsman, yet with a tool that is slowly falling apart. Calamity Ganon just happens to be the one, or in this case, Ganondorf and Calamity Ganon, just happened to be the two that actually were able to make a difference in that regard. Anywho, Calamity Ganon is officially nearing the end of his defeat. My throat is getting absurdly sore because I've been talking for the last 2.5 hours straight. And yeah, we're doing great. By the way, we're approaching the 6-day mark worth of battle in this game. So now Link is not only fighting Calamity Ganon, but he's also battling against his just exhaustion in and of itself. Because you cannot say that an individual could fight for 6-7 days straight without succumbing to exhaustion in and of itself. This Link would be permanently exhausted and potentially debilitated due to the outcome of this battle. Now, note that in a standard battle, this guy would be done in about maybe 6 to 12 hours worth of duel. But we're not going there. We're going straight for the 1 week straight duel with Calamity Ganon. And all honesty, I think that is kind of the absurd side of this. 6 days of non-stop combat would leave anyone in a state of delirious. They'd be delirious, they'd be exhausted, they would be many things. Healthy, not one of them. Also, I do admit that Link has had, more than his fair share of meals during this duel, but that's also kind of a misnomer, because he can literally eat 100 wheels of cheese and have absolutely no problem. Anyways, can you fire a laser beam at me, please? I really need it. Come on, fire your laser. Thank you. And I'm guessing about 4 bombs and Calamity Ganon is officially defeated. And we'll let the cutscene play out as soon as he is officially down, because I'm feeling pretty good about it. Now, once this version of Ganon is officially defeated, technically we only have a little bit left. It's more or less a victory lap once this is defeated. The Dark Beats Ganon is meant to be a storyline event.
Ganon was born out of a dark past. He is a pure embodiment of the ancient evil that is reborn time and time again. He has given up on reincarnation and assumed his pure, enraged form. If set free upon our world, the destruction will be unlike anything ever seen before.
Welcome, Dark Beast Ganon.
I entrust you with the bow of light, a powerful weapon in the face of evil. Link, you may not yet be at a point where you have fully recovered your power, or all of your memories. But courage need not be removed, for it is never forgotten.
Courage need not be remembered, for it is never forgotten. That is something that needs to be mentioned about this version of Link. About all Legends of Zelda Links in general. Courage is something that they have always had, always maintained, but never something that had to be found. They simply exist with that level of power. And so, for this Link, despite the fact that he is a Link that failed, a Link that lost, this is also a Link that, in spite of that, seeks to remedy it, seeks to save the world in whatever way he can. Oh, right. I have a horse that isn't actually aptly prepared for this, so please ignore any failings on my part, because for whatever reason, I do not like taming horses in Breath of the Wild. It's a character flaw of mine. Anywho, first 3 shots, I think it takes like 10 shots altogether to be able to defeat Ganon. But yeah, this is the final fight, the one that is supposed to showcase just how strong Ganon is. And yet, this version of Ganon really just does not measure up in its final form. Everything else that has happened that has led to this moment, this battle, is kind of thrown by the wayside. It exists, it's something that you need to be aware of, but it's not something that necessarily needs much to grow with it. This version of Ganon is weaker, more chaotic in nature. I'm gonna die now, aren't I? No, 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 get out of its way, please! I am not dying after 2 hours of this. Anyways, with Dark Beast Ganon, its whole storyline is simply that it's given up on reincarnation. It's given up on being the embodiment of evil that it once was. Instead, it is focusing in on raw power, destructive might, and endless strength. So, in my mind, it's kind of a one-and-done type boss. Come on.
That's the very core of Ganon's being.
No.
Do what you must, Link.
Come on. Open up.
Finish him, Link.
I didn't arc that right. I did not arc that right. Nope, 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 nope. Heal up very fast. This is gonna hurt. We're just gonna eat, 50 apples in the span of 6 seconds. Ow. Yeah, that would have killed me. That really would have killed me. Hooray. Let's just eat a whole bunch more apples so that circumstance doesn't come up again. And we're gonna try that one more time. Come on. Dark Beast Ganon, you can do the thing. I've been waiting for you to do the thing for 2 hours. Anyways, if you like what you see, drop a like, leave subscribe. And we'll catch you next week with a brand new series. Until then, enjoy the finale, and I hope you all have a good one. This is finally proof that we can beat Breath of the Wild using only 2 weapons. 1 bow and 1 shield.
I've been keeping watch over you all this time. I've witnessed your struggles to return to us, as well as your trials in battle. I always thought, no, I always believed that you would find a way to defeat Ganon. I never lost faith in you over these many years. Thank you, Link. The hero of Hyrule. May I ask, do you really remember me?